Hi everybody, I'm Lida Malandra of Enartis South Africa, and today I'll be discussing an exciting new product called Nutriferm X. This product is able to bring power to thiol production. So the project started many years ago at Stellenbosch University under Professor Wessel du Toit, and Enartis partnered with them 2 years ago to evaluate this as a commercial product. There have been quite a lot of aspects to this legally as well. It is currently been approved for sale in South Africa, and we are busy with the royalty agreements with Enartis, and the project was funded by WineTech. So if we have a quick recap of thiols, we all know that thiols are made up of 3MH, 3MHA, and 4MP, giving those typical grapefruit, passion fruit, guava, gooseberry, box tree, and even blackcurrant. If you look at the chemical structure, the only important thing to note here is the sulfur component in each of these compounds. So very basically, what happens when Nutriferm is consumed by the yeast? Nutriferm X is simply a yeast nutrient that's bound to a sulfur group. So the yeast will consume the nutrient, take what it needs for structure, function, and growth, and then will release the sulfur component. Too much sulfur in a yeast cell can be quite toxic for the yeast, so it will look to detoxify itself. And by doing that, it will look in the juice, and there are various components it can take up and see. So for example, it will take in an hexanol, and the sulfur can bind to this hexanol with a hydrogen atom, and it actually forms a volatile thiol. So it's the real beauty of Nutriferm X. This concept's not new to Enartis. Years ago, we launched a Ripen Up, and it was actually using glutathione at the beginning of alcoholic fermentation. So once you have these volatile thiols, the yeast is detoxified, but then we'll use them to the precursors to release your fruity aromatics. So there were quite a few trials done in 2020, but the ones we're going to discuss or review today are the ones that were significant, that actually had a control and the treatment with Nutriferm X. So all in all, there were 18 significant trials. How Nutriferm X is used is really important, and this is part of the technology. So what has to happen is there needs to be a mixer on your tank. You have to rehydrate your yeast, and once you are ready to inoculate your yeast, you put the mixer on in the tank. Then you can add Nutriferm X, time exactly 15 minutes, and then add the yeast. This is quite crucial for the working of this product and uptake by the yeast. So if we look in general at what are high levels of, for example, 3MH, so we can benchmark a parameter or a value, we can have a look at the top 10 Sauvignon Blancs over 4 years. And these typically range between 0 to 2,500 nanograms per liter 3MH. I'm just going to take a benchmark of 2,000, which is quite high, but I think it's a good value to look at. Interesting, I think you can see not all high thiol-driven Sauvignon Blancs actually win top 10. And the same for 3MHA. This is much more potent than 3MH and is perceived at a much lower concentration. So I'm going to use 500 nanograms per hectoliter to benchmark what Nutriferm X is boosting in the wines. So if we go back to the fermentation trials, we will just review not all, but some of the trials to see how it was boosted and to what degree as well. So this is one of the first trials. It was on Sauvignon Blanc. The yeast used was an Enartis Firm Aroma White. The first bar is your 3MH and your second bar is 3MHA. And I've put in the parameters for us to see from the previous slides. So if you look at the control, it's quite a normal style of Sauvignon Blanc. The juices were exactly the same, and the trial was with Nutriferm X. And what we see is there's quite a dramatic increase of your 3MH, and this is quite significant. So you boost it from maybe an average wine to a much more thiol-driven Sauvignon Blanc. Similarly, if we look at a Sauvignon Blanc with a competitor yeast strain, again, this is a really good Sauvignon Blanc with its 3MH and 3MHA values. The trial that was done, or the treatment, you could see this was crazy high and would produce a very potent Sauvignon Blanc. Here I'm using a Coulombar, which is quite interesting. Again, also thiol variety. We used Enartis Q citrus. The control was very good. Again, the treatment boosted it by twofold. So in all the trials, there was an increase in thiols to different degrees. Again, another Coulombar, competitor yeast, was very normal kind of thiol levels. And then with Nutriferm X, it was quite significant. I think the 3MH here would also be a higher sensory perception, as it is so much more potent than 3MH. Okay. So back to Sauvignon Blanc. This was Enartis from ES181. And you can see these are almost the lowest levels that one can actually measure for these thiols. So it was not very thiol-driven Sauvignon Blanc. But with the treatment of Nutriferm X, you actually get to quite an average or better Sauvignon Blanc with thiols. And that was a 5-time increase in those thiols. This was also the opportunity for Enartis to trial a new yeast, so Enartis THL or thiol, which was launched overseas. And you can see the control is quite low for both the 3MH and 3MHA. However, with the treated wine, it was significantly higher. And what's super interesting is how high the 3MHA is. This would give you an unbelievably potent Sauvignon Blanc. And then maybe this Sauvignon Blanc also with the competitor strain, average levels actually quite good with 3MHA. When added, it was also very high. So you can see the trend is that they were all increased. And in fact, this was 6 times higher. So just looking in general at chemical analysis, the wines were the only alcohol levels. So in all the wines treated with Nutriferm X, there was a 0.1 to 0.14 decrease in alcohol. So maybe this is something we can further investigate going forward. So the wines were then analyzed sensorially with a few judges. They were randomized, and we asked the judges to rate their preference of the control versus the treated wine, and also give us aromatic descriptors. So in the first one, Sauvignon Blanc with Enartis ES181, 4 out of the 4 judges preferred the treated wine and gave notes of passion fruit, melon, sweaty and much more prominent fruit, versus banana, melon, and less aromatic intensity. The Q citrus was again preferred by all 4 judges, and the tasting notes were high thiol, sweaty, guava, tomato leaf, and fuller on the palate. And of course the control, just a less aromatic intensity. So again, this was our Coulomb bar with 181. All four preferred the treated wine versus the control. And what was really noticed was there was a passion fruit explosion. Gooseberry, much more fruit forward, and again a fuller palate. So the control was fresh passion fruit, but lower thiol. So you could really perceive these differences. For the new yeast strain that we were evaluating, 5 out of 5 judges preferred the treatment with firm thiol, and it gave the tomato leaf, passion fruit, blackcurrant fuller on the palate, more depth and juicy. So the wines are a lot more complex in many ways. And for the control was just less aromatic intensity. So I think one of the big questions was, how do these aromatics evolve over time? As we all know, volatile thiols with either glycolysis or oxidation decrease with time. And so there was wine that was bottled and sulfured, and we tasted 1 month post-bottling and 5 months post-bottling, and evaluated again to see what was the preferred wine and how did it develop. So we can see 5 months post-bottling, the firm thiol went from 5 people, or all the judges preferring it, to 3 out of 4, and 1 liking the control. So there was a slight split, but majority still preferred the treated wine. The same for Q citrus. This was actually more of a split of the judges. So you don't necessarily produce a wine that's preferred by everyone. Q citrus on its own gave a really good representation of Sauvignon Blanc. So if we look at the treatment, expressive fruit, guava, and complex palate, but the control had melon, fresh fruit, elegant with complexity. So how did they develop over time? 5 months later, it was still a split of the judges' preference of the 2 wines. And then the competitor yeast, we could see that people preferred the treated wine, gave intense fruit, grapefruit, citrus, lemon, complex palate, fuller palates, and less aromatic intensity, but same style for the control. 5 months later, it was still the control, the treatment was still the preferred wine out of both of them. So I think the take home from all of us that the wines maintained the sensory profile over time. They remained fruit driven, probably lower intensity, aromatic intensity. They were all the preferred wines compared to the control. And in fact, all the trials we did, it did boost it, but at varying degrees. So higher aromatic and full on the palate. This was consistently mentioned, was that it had a fuller palate. And this could be from the more fruit-driven aspect of these wines, making it seem much fuller on the palate. In closing, it's always good to know that there are a lot of precautions that should be taken into consideration. Following the instructions of use and dosage of this product is crucial. How it's used, the method it's used at by the yeast is quite scientific. Not all juices are better than others, and as I said before, we did many trials. It might have boosted certain wines, but it wasn't sensorially different. It might have been slightly higher. It can't boost every single juice or every single wine. It's really dependent on the wine. Not all yeasts are equal. We all know that different yeasts have different abilities to release and convert thiols. And so choice of yeast and trialing of yeast is really important. Overuse can definitely result in reductive characteristics. And then, as we know, thiols are sensitive, so working with your juice to remove metals that can form free radicals is highly advised, and we can give you a few options there. And then, of course, adding sufficient SO2 and keeping low temperatures are highly important. So follow the specs of your yeast supplier. South African wines produced with Enartis Nutriferm X can now be legally sold within the country's border and exported only to the EU with regards to the EPA agreement. It still remains the producer's responsibility to ensure the export destination country's regulations are adhered to. With great power comes great responsibility. After much deliberation with industry role players, it's clear that products should be used with the utmost caution. The nutrients should be applied wisely and sparingly, creating elegant wines with expressive fruit-different characters, a trait which most consumers are drawn to. The use of wines produced in this way also shows enormous potential as a blending component by adding complexity and character where needed. I'd like to thank the Sauvignon Blanc Association, Corinne Coetzee from Basic Wine, Wine Tech, and Stellenbosch University for this opportunity. Thank you.